This conference will now be recorded.
Okay, thank you and welcome everyone. We have a good crew here. We got 2, 4, 6, 7, 8, 9. So we almost have a minion here. We can pray afterwards. And we have lots of folks out there in internet land. I think most of you know me. For those of you that don't, I'm Rabbi Mike Lotker. I am I guess a semi-retired rabbi. I'm also a physicist, worked in alternative energy. I've had a bunch of different pulpits from which I have retired. And now I do fun stuff. And for me, the idea of fun stuff is exactly what we're doing this morning, which is teaching and studying together. So I'm here in Amarillo, Texas for the high holidays, and I thought it would be fun to get together to do a program which I call Revisiting the Garden of Eden with a Jewish Tour Guide. So as we'll see, the mega lesson of the text of the study is that different people can read the same text and see very, very different things in the text. And in particular, we will see a very different reading from a Jewish reading of the text and a Christian reading of the text comes up with very, very different insights. And if people have questions, I mean, we're a small enough group that you can jump in. I don't know if there's a way of electronically raising hands, but just shout, and if it doesn't get too out of hand, we will figure it out. Let's see if this is working. Okay, so I know there's a little bit of lag from my computer to the internet. There we go. So first, there's a couple of questions as we begin. And I guess I'll focus on people in the room, but if people out there want to answer questions, you can answer questions too. So who are the characters in the story? So this is a question on what do you know about the story? There are a bunch of characters in the Garden of Eden story. Who are they? Eve, okay. Adam and Eve, and who else?
The snake.
The snake. There's one more character in the story.
God.
God. Right. So we got 4 characters. Adam, name is correct. Eve, we'll see she has a Hebrew name. The snake, which is actually different in English and in Hebrew, and God has lots of different names. So which ones tell the truth and which ones don't tell the truth?
None of them tell the truth.
None of them tell the truth. Okay, any other answers? And if people want to jump in from the internet, you feel free. Anybody tell the truth in the story? This is the first time I've ever heard anybody say this. This is really interesting.
Okay,
The snake.
the snake says you will not die.
Yeah, we'll get into the detailed text. So you're saying the snake tells the truth?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, it's a story that was written a long time ago. Who knows if anybody's telling the truth, really?
Who knows? Well, we know because we're going to read the story and we'll see what happens and we'll see if they tell the truth in the story. Based on the story, whether it happened or not is actually beside the point. Okay. Now here's another question that most people are pretty confident that they know, and that question is, why were Adam and Eve expelled from the garden?
Because they didn't do what they were told to do. They were told not to eat the fruit.
Okay, because they disobeyed and ate the fruit. What were you going to say?
They were on mute.
Because they were having sex.
They disobeyed the orders.
Okay, same basic response.
They did what they were told. They didn't ask for forgiveness.
But they didn't ask for forgiveness.
Right.
Right. In fact, there is not one single example in the entire Torah of anybody asking for forgiveness and receiving forgiveness. I mean, it's another little interesting tidbit here. Any other answers about why they were expelled? Okay, it's good. Good.
I think part of it had to do with God and whoever he's calling Eve, fearing that Adam and Eve were going to know as much as they did and live forever.
Okay, so that's I actually don't know if people are. I'm guessing that out in internet land you can't hear the discussion in the room. Is that correct? This is really important.
That's correct. Can't hear it well.
No.
Okay, so I will try and repeat if I remember, but yes. So yeah, so we've had a bunch of different responses. So let's get into the story. So the first thing which is interesting about this story is there are two stories of creation. In the opening book of Genesis, the opening chapter, sorry, of Genesis, the story is told, and I think of it as if we were filming it, it would be like this little thing in the lower right. It would be filmed from space. God creates light. Whoa, where am I? Yeah, okay, no, it's good. God creates light. God separates light from darkness. It's at a great distance. Everywhere in the text, when they refer to the deity, my boss and yours, in Hebrew, it's referred to as Elohim, which is usually translated as God. And it's a job description, not a personal name. One very interesting thing is that God speaks the universe into existence. The text could have said, God thought it was too dark, so God made light. But that's not what the text says. The text says, God said, let there be light, and there was light, which highlights the significance of speech and words in Judaism. In fact, the same word is used for the Hebrew word for word, which is davar, as the word for thing. The word thing and word are the same in Hebrew. Many things are called good. A few are called very good. Nothing's perfect and nothing's bad. And now I'm going to just quote from the text. It says, and some of you got the physical handout I sent. This was my old way of teaching this. Now that I have PowerPoint, I much prefer to teach it the way we're doing it. In Genesis 1, 26 and 27, the text says, let us make man, Adam. Adam probably refers to humanity here, not a proper name for the first man. Let us make Adam in our image, after our likeness. And God created Adam in his image. In the image of God, he created him, male and female, he created them. So we're going to have an interesting problem. In the first chapter of Genesis, we have a male and a female, and then all of a sudden we're going to have surgery and things. And so, what's up with that? So one of the interesting things here is how the text says, let us make man in our image. And that's a pretty good translation. It says, Na'aseh Adam b'tzelmenu. And so the question is, who is God talking to? God typically speaks in a deep voice. I am the Lord your God who took you out of Egypt to be your God. God typically speaks in the first person singular. I command this, I do that. Only in a few places in this story does God speak in the first person plural. Let us make humanity in our image. So the question is, who is God speaking to?
Rabbi?
Yes.
Yeah, doesn't the I am ending on Elohim imply plural?
Yes. So that, and even the same is true even with Adonai. So the im ending, the word Elohim, is a plural word. You would expect it to be translated as gods with an S. It probably comes from Babylonian influence, where the god was El, and they had a pantheon of gods. But the very interesting thing is, in the opening of the Bible, it says, Bereshit bara Elohim. The verb is bara, and it's in the singular. If Elohim was being treated as a plural, it would be Bereshit baru Elohim. But It's a very good observation, and I would say it's a holdover in Judaism from the idea of a pantheon of gods. So traditional Jewish answer is God was speaking to the angels, the heavenly host in heaven. Can anybody guess what the traditional Christian answer is when God says, let us make humanity in our image?
His son.
Sorry?
His son.
Trinity.
Yeah.
Right. God is triune in Christian thought. A modern Jewish thought, which I like, is that maybe God was talking to the animals. First 6 days of creation, actually God makes everything. So here God says, let us make humanity in our image. So in the image of all the animals and plants, namely DNA, and also in the divine image. I believe this is a biblical proof text for evolution. Okay, so now we've got humanity created, And then in the middle of Genesis 2, verse 4, we find ourselves in the Garden of Eden. The scene shifts dramatically. There's no people, there's no plants. And then the rest of the story, whenever the text refers to God, instead of just Elohim, it's Yud-He Vav-He Elohim, which in prayer, when Jews reach this word, we say Adonai, which actually means my Lord's plural. This is another fun thing. If it was my Lord, it would be Adoni. But we never say Yud-He Vav-He in Jewish tradition because the name is too sacred to say even in prayer. The last time it was said authoritatively was yeah. When you see somebody, you may need to mute people if you see that feedback coming through. So the rabbis refer to Yud-He Vav-He, I'll just refer to that as Adonai, as referring to God's aspect of mercy. And there's some interesting reasons on this. If you want this class to go on for 6 hours, I will explain everything. And Elohim also means judge. So the rabbis refer to this dual use of Adonai Elohim as God's aspect of mercy and God's aspect of judgment, or a moral balance. And then verse 2:7, Adonai, God, formed Adam from the dust of the earth, the Adamah. So there's a pun there in Hebrew, which you miss in English. Adam is created from the Adamah. It would be like we'd say the earthling is created from the earth. And he blew into his nostrils the breath of life, and the Adam became a living being. This is the source of Jewish tradition that human life begins with the first breath rather than at conception and other religious traditions. We can have an hour and a half discussion of that if you like. Okay, back to the text. The Lord God planted a garden eastward in Eden. I got to be sensitive to the delay. And there he put a man whom he had formed. And out of the ground, the Lord God made every tree grow that is pleasant to the sight and good for food. The tree of life was also in the midst of the garden, and the tree of knowledge of good and evil. And later in the text, we're going to see the tree of knowledge of good and evil is also in the middle of the garden. Okay? And I'll just say, yeah, Adonai God. I don't like Lord. And Adonai God commanded the Adam, saying, of every tree in the garden you are free to eat, but as for the tree of knowledge of good and evil, you must not eat of it, for as soon as you eat of it, you shall die. And I want to look into the literal translation of that because it's even more emphatic. Literally, it's saying, on the day you eat of it, you will surely die, or you must die, yes, die, or dying, you will die. There's no literal way to translate this. The Hebrew is a unique form called the infinitive absolute. It's used because there's no punctuation like exclamation points and things in Hebrew. So if you look what I've highlighted here at the bottom, those of you that can read Hebrew, it says mot tamut. So you see the repetition of the word mut. So it's dying, you will die. And it also says, sorry. It also says very clearly, sorry, it's going to take a little while to catch up. It says, on the day you eat of it. It's very clear. B'yom achalcha mimenu, the day you eat of it. Okay, so we're going to continue. The name of the tree is Eitz Hada'at Tov V'Ra, the tree of knowledge of good and evil. But probably the phrase good and evil is a merism. Merism is an English word or a phrase like soup to nuts. If I tell you we're having a meal and we're going to serve everything soup to nuts, you're going to expect more than soup and nuts, right? So in other places in the Bible, which I highlight here, the phrase is used as knowledge of everything. It just doesn't mean good and evil, but knowledge of everything. The type of fruit or the tree is not stated. The rabbis say it was a fig tree because Adam and Chava, we'll see Chava's name come up in a minute, cover themselves with fig leaves. So how did it become an apple? The idea enters in the Vulgate, which is a 4th century Latin translation, Christian translation, because St. Jerome, the translator, wanted to emphasize the evil of eating the fruit. And so the Latin word for wrongdoing is malum, and the Latin word for apple is malus. So that was his way of underlining how evil it was to eat the fruit. And that's why us guys have Adam's apples rather than Adam's figs in our throats. Okay, now Adam is lonely, so he's going to be looking for someone. So I'm just going to read this as simply text. And Adonai God said, "It is not good that the man should be alone. I will make a help for him, or a fitting helper or helpmate." We're going to talk about that translation in a minute. And out of the ground, Adonai God formed every beast of the field and every bird of the air and brought them to Adam to see what he would call him. And whatever Adam called every living creature, that was its name. And Adam gave names to all the cattle and to the birds of the air and to every beast of the field. But for Adam, no fitting helper was found. And Adonai God made Adam fall into a deep sleep, and he slept. And he took from one of his ribs, and the Hebrew word is tsela, we're going to talk a lot about that, and closed up the flesh beneath it. And the rib which Adonai God had taken from the man made he a woman, and brought her to the man. And Adam said, "This one now is bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh. She shall be called woman, because she was taken out of man." And works in Hebrew too, she shall be called Isha, because she's taken out of Ish. "Therefore shall a man leave his father and mother, shall cleave to his wife, and they shall be one flesh. And they were both naked, the man and his wife, and they were not ashamed." And as you can see from the picture, Adam is really happy about it.
Does this contradict the first story in that it sounds like
Yes.
that the animals were created after Adam?
Well, in the opening section of Genesis, chapter 1, and the first 4 verses, you have everything being created. And now all of a sudden,
Yeah.
so I'm not quite sure I understood about the animals. In both stories, the animals seem to exist before the man. Although, no, in the second story, I'm not sure when the animals are created, but clearly there are no plants.
There's animals created after Adam.
Okay, he names them afterwards, but I don't know if it says when he's created. I don't remember the exact text.
That was in the first
Okay.
Genesis.
But in the first story of Genesis, we had man and woman, and in the second story in Genesis, we don't have women. That's the most obvious. And
Yeah.
that leads, by the way, to a whole other hour-and-a-half discussion of different authors of the text. So the sacred way of studying the text is God wrote everything. Why weren't there any plants in the second story? The plants have been created, but they hadn't yet sprouted. We'll see their explanation for the man and the woman. Scholars recognize that there are at least 4 authors that we find in the Torah. So the opening section, Genesis 1, is attributed to the priestly author, who refers to God as Elohim. And the second story that we're going to dig into in the Garden of Eden is referred to as the J author, because it's the German way of pronouncing Yahweh, which we're not supposed to pronounce. We don't know how to pronounce it, so I'm not sure I'm right. So they would spell with a Yah with a J. So it's, anyway, but again, hour and a half, sorry. Yes.
Why, if God created man out of dust, did he have to take part of him to create a woman? Why wasn't she created out of dust?
Okay, yeah, that's a great question. So I'll repeat it for our listeners. Oh, wait. Why didn't God create the woman out of dust as well? It's a very good question. For all good questions, deep theological questions, which I don't have the answer to, my answer is God knows. Okay.
Okay.
So the first thing that God says is not good in this story is loneliness. So God says the man needs an ezer kenegdo, which is often translated as helpmate or helpmeet or fitting helper, which has a connotation in English of being vaguely demeaning. But God is called an ezer in other places in the Bible, and the word keneged has the root meaning. I'm trying to do this. I can't even see myself. Yeah, okay, good. It has the root meaning of balance, of being in opposition. like the scales of justice. Thus, the woman will help by being a balance, a supportive opposite. The phrase could even mean a power equal to him. In this spirit, I titled my rabbinic thesis, Ezer Kenegdo, toward a theology of Jewish-Christian partnership. At Hebrew Union College, to become a rabbi, you need to write a thesis, kind of like a PhD thesis. Okay, so now we're going to get into the question of who was that woman. In the Garden of Eden, the characters in Hebrew are Adam and Chava. So why do we have the name Eve? And the answer is, in the Greek translation of the Bible, which is a Jewish translation, there is no, oh, I feel so good because I don't have to cover my mouth when I say this. There's no, so Chava, so the Greek translators just took the Cha away from Chava, leaving Eva, from which we get Eve. You also miss an important pun in there, not really a pun, but Chava is related to the word Chai, which means, and it's even in the text identifies her, she's the mother of all living.
Life.
Sorry?
Life.
Life. Chai means life. Yes, thank you. Okay, now we're going to have an interesting question, which is, they are, in Genesis, it says they were both naked, the man and his wife, and they were not ashamed. So which other beings are naked but not ashamed?
Animals.
Animals? Anybody else anything else you can think of that are naked and not ashamed?
Babies.
Yes, babies and animals. So the question, can this be a key message in our story? Clearly, I wouldn't raise it unless I think it is.
The New Testament was translated from Hebrew to Greek to English, is that correct?
It's actually a complicated story. The New Testament was written in Greek. The New Testament is written in biblical Greek. And then, hold on. We don't have any Hebrew or Aramaic. I mean, you can buy a copy in Hebrew, but it was written in Greek. It was written in Greek. Yes, okay. So now let's get into the question of the surgery on Adam. So Adonai, God, made Adam fall into a deep sleep, and he slept, and he took from one of his tzellas and closed up the flesh. So what could a tzela possibly be? It could be a rib. It's a good translation of the Hebrew word tzela. It can also mean side. In other places in the Bible, it's translated as side. So the idea arises that the first Adam Rishon that we saw in Genesis 1, was a hermaphrodite, was both male and female. And one way of imaging this is, the way I've illustrated it there is that like Siamese twins with male and female halves, and the surgery was to separate the two sides. When you get into Midrash, which is rabbinic stories, you will see stories that the first woman was Lilith, and there's a wonderful mythology about Lilith, and I have a 5-session class on my website. Maybe after we're done here, I can introduce you to my website about Jewish mythology and a lot on Lilith. Okay, so here's another fascinating idea. And it comes from Zioni Zebet, a scholar, and he points out a few interesting things. The Israelites, the authors of this text, this is not now classic rabbinics. This is not a pious interpretation. And I can honestly say both religious Jews and religious Christians really don't like this interpretation, which is why I have so much delight in presenting it. The Israelites knew human and animal skeletal structure. They knew humans from ossuaries. The way people were buried in biblical times and ancient times is they were put in a cave. I love presenting this to Christians. They were put in a cave. A stone was rolled to seal the cave. Does this sound familiar? And then a year later, they would go back. The flesh had decomposed, and the bones were left. And so the bones then were gathered into the back of the cave. And in fact, some people believe that the phrase that you see a lot in the Hebrew Bible, that he was gathered to his kin or gathered to his fathers, literally refer to this ossuary idea. And they knew animals from eating animals. Okay. They knew that human males and females had the same number of ribs and other bones. You might expect if Chava was made from one of Adam's ribs, that women would have one more rib than men. So the question is there a bone which male animals have that female animals don't have, and which the human male does not have? Anybody familiar with this?
It's, in the skeleton, you can tell the skeleton is different by looking around the hip area.
Yeah, they're different, but there's an actual bone. Let's just get into it rather than guessing. The bone is called the baculum, or, come on, you can do it, or the os penis. So most male mammals have a penis bone called the baculum or os penis. This bone is absent in a few primates, spider monkeys, and humans. So you can see there's a skeleton of a dog, and you can see the penis bone on the dog. Here's some sample penis bone. This is my penis bone. I have learned not to hand this to women because they reasonably freak out. This doesn't come from my penis. This is actually I think it's a raccoon's penis bone. But since I own it, I can state this is my penis bone. So, and you can order these on the internet. This is so charming. So you can put a necklace and wear a penis bone. And you can have so much fun discussing that with your therapist. So I will pass this around to anybody who wants to see it.
In the early 1900s and 1800s, the raccoon penis bone was used as toothpicks.
As toothpicks, yes.
Used as toothpicks.
Yeah.
So are you saying that in connection with penis bone, the size matters? I just want to get this for the record. Because whales have a penis bone. And no one is quite sure why this exists. There's some really interesting theories, another hour and a half. But the other interesting thing about this is the phrase right after God takes the tselem out of Adam, it says he closed up the flesh at that spot, literally beneath it. V'yizgor basar tachtena. Tachtena comes from the same root as tochas, which means your bottom, or what is underneath. So this may refer to the perennial raft or seam or scar under the male scrotum. We're not going to have a show and tell.
I'm sorry, I have to see what you're talking about.
Yes, okay.
If there's pictures or props, I can
Yes,
understand.
fake news. Yeah, well, I'm so enamored with the idea of being an ordained rabbi that I'm not going to do that. So that's actually very consistent with the idea, I would say, that the Israelite authors of this text came up with, that the bone might have been the os penis and the explanation for the seam under the scrotum. So anyway, that's just a fun digression. Let's get back to the text. Sorry?
We did. We gave it down.
Okay,
So
Genesis.
that was to become the woman's rib? Is that what?
No, that was the woman. So the question is, the woman was made from something called a tsela. The tsela could be Adam's rib. It could be Adam's side, as if the original Adam was Siamese twins and split into two, or perhaps from this bone. It's just a fun idea.
So it's not found in the woman's, anywhere in the woman's body. It didn't.
No, woman has a complete body, but the interesting thing is that bone is missing from men. Another show and tell we're not going to have. But if you look at other mammals like a dog, a whale, raccoon, they have a penis bone.
Got it.
It actually fits the logic of the story. Why don't humans have a penis bone when other mammals do?
Yeah, but lady raccoons and lady hogs and the female of the species, they
don't have a penis bone.
right, but their mates do.
Yes.
So
So to make humans, God took the penis bone and created the woman. The interesting question, which I think somebody raised, is why weren't in the garden story, why weren't women made first or at the same time as the man? So there's a story in there about the woman being made from the man, which is, an interesting story for us to speculate on why. And there's lots of fun things like the first one was a rough draft, and then the second one was perfected.
The story is about humans, but we don't make any distinction that there were both the male and female animals.
Right. It's clear from the text that when animals are made, they're made male and female. Did you have a question?
Yeah. You went back up to where Adam says something, does he say this time or this one is of
Yes, bone of my bone, flesh of my flesh.
this time?
Yeah, this time or this one, I don't remember exactly.
Doesn't that infer that there's one before?
Okay, so now I'm going to even get a little more outrageous, but it's all your fault.
It's okay.
Okay,
Okay.
so the text actually reads, and I think I have it in the handout. Yes, I forgot I have the handout here. The text actually reads that Adam was lonely. He didn't have an Ezer Kenegdo. And then, I forgot I have this. And he said, and God brings before Adam all the animals. Well, maybe I don't have the text here. God brings before, oh no, I do. Yes, God brings before Adam all the wild beasts and birds of the sky and brought them to the man to see what he would call them. And so he gives his names, he names the animals. And then it says, but for Adam, no Ezer Kenegdo, no fitting helper was found. Okay, let's go back to that scene. God's bringing the animals to Adam. And Adam is trying them out to see if they would be an Ezer Kenegdo. What do you think might have been happening? Don't be afraid to get down in the dirt. Rashi, the 11th century commentator, says what was happening was bestiality, that Adam was trying to see if he had a sexual partner in these animals, and one was not found. So therefore, one had to be created.
That just ain't right.
I missed that.
He said that just ain't right.
That just ain't right. Yeah, well, that's what Adam said. But I'm saying here's what's going on, and this is actually very important. In the Jewish tradition, we start with text. The underlying assumption in Judaism is the text is a letter from God. And it's filled with depth and infinite meaning, and every phrase and every word and every grammatical construction is secrets to dig into the text. So we never, ever, ever stop digging as long as there's a basis in there. So I agree with you, it just ain't right. Who says it's not right? Later in the text it will say, I think it'll say it's not right. But Rashi says that's one of the things we learn from the text. So this is very Jewish. Dig into the text, and as long as we're digging into the text, it's kosher. If you start bringing in, ideas that are outside the text, then we've left the world of traditional analysis. This is very different than the Protestant idea of sola scriptura. And sola scriptura, in the Protestant Reformation, the idea was just give me the text. And don't tell me what it means. I will figure out what it means for myself. And I would say I have some sympathy for that, although brilliant people have been poring over this for thousands of years. So I want to see what they have to say. But if you're going to study the text, at least study the text in Hebrew for the Bible, Hebrew Bible, and Greek for the New Testament, so you can understand it and read it for yourself. Okay, let's get back to the text.
Rabbi,
Now the serpent, yes.
can we go back to something just a little earlier where, the sentence is, hence a man leaves his father and mother and clings to his
Yeah, we're
wife.
going to get to it again.
Well,
Yes.
There was nothing about mothers and fathers in the story at that point.
Right.
I
Right,
mean,
so what,
so is that one of the secrets that were, just,
no, I would say there, the meaning is explanatory. Men and women came from one flesh. A man and his mate were originally one flesh. And so that explains the tendency of us wanting to become one flesh again and to attach to a spouse rather than remaining attached to mothers and fathers. I think that's simply a text designed to explain the world as the way it is.
okay. So even though the mothers and fathers were never mentioned in the story, it's just something you just extrapolate
Yeah,
from.
there were no mothers and fathers in the story. We only have two
Right.
people.
Right.
Okay, let's get back to the text. And we're going to run long, but okay. Now the serpent was more subtle. Another Hebrew pun. The Hebrew word for subtle is arum, which is a pun on the Hebrew word for naked, which is arumim. Than any beast of the field which Adonai God had made. And he said to the woman, so the serpent's now talking to the woman. He says to the woman, has God said you should not eat of any tree of the garden? And the woman said to the serpent, we may eat of the fruit of the trees of the garden, but of the fruit of the tree which is in the midst of the garden, God has said, you shall not eat of it, nor shall you touch it, lest you die. And the serpent says to the woman, surely you shall not die. For God knows that in the day you eat of it, then your eyes will be open and you will be as gods. The Hebrew is Elohim, and Elohim can mean plural God, small g, or it can mean our God, capital G. So it can mean, you would mean like gods, or you will be like God. And when the woman saw that the tree was good for food and was pleasant to the eyes, and a tree desired to make one wise, she took of the fruit and ate, and gave also to her husband with her, and he ate. And the eyes of both of them were open, and they knew that they were naked, and they sewed fig leaves together and made themselves loincloths. So here's some questions about this conversation. It's silly of me to ask first question because I'm asking you to guess what I'm thinking. I would assert that the serpent's question was particularly shrewd because it was open-ended. The serpent could have said, has God told you not to eat of that tree of knowledge of good and evil? And the woman's answer could have simply been, yep. But the serpent was shrewd because he wanted to engage her in a conversation. Okay, here's the next question. Chava says we shouldn't eat the fruit or touch it. Who told her not to touch it?
Adam?
Yeah, it's not a particularly hard question. There's only one other person. You can speculate that maybe God told her, but we don't have that in the text. So Adam says to her, don't eat it, don't touch it, don't look at it, don't go near it. He wanted to keep her away. Is the serpent speaking the truth? So far, he says, your eyes will be open and you will know good and evil, and their eyes are open and they know good and evil. And by the way, where was the man during this conversation? So Midrash, rabbinic stories, looking at gaps like this, said that they had made love and he was sleeping. Okay, and now God arrives to the scene. And here God asks a number of questions. God called out to the man and said, where are you? Which is an interesting question because you would think God would know where the man was. I can't remember if I have separate slides on this. One of the things that this teaches us, according to the rabbis, is to knock on the door, to give people, don't just barge in on people. Here's one of my favorite ones. Who told you you were naked? Because they said we were naked and ashamed. And then he says, and this is my accent on God, did you eat from the tree from which I had forbidden you to eat? The man and the woman are fine, upstanding folks. The man says, it's not my fault. The woman that you put by my side, who asked for her? The woman that you put by my side, she gave of me of the tree and I ate. It reminds me of a story, in the old country, the watchman catches a thief and they go before the judge. And the thief says to the judge, you shouldn't punish me, you should punish the watchman for all the crimes that I've committed. And the judge says, what are you talking about? And the thief says, I'm a thief. My job is to steal. I was doing my job. The watchman was supposed to stop me. He wasn't doing his job. You should punish him. Same wonderful logic here. The woman's response, not my fault. The serpent duped me and I ate. Okay, so now God speaks to them, what I am going to call very carefully the consequences of disobedience. Actually, I may regret this, but I want to make this a little bigger. Yeah, for our group. Okay. To the woman, he says, I will greatly multiply the pain of your childbearing. In sorrow you shall bring forth children, and your desire shall be for your husband, and he shall rule over you. And to, sorry?
But before that, wasn't it? I mean, he was the serpent because it told him to eat the dust of the ground.
We haven't gotten into that yet. Actually, I'm not going to discuss that because I'm more interested in what happens to the people. And to Adam, he says, because you have listened to the voice of your wife and have eaten of the tree which I commanded you, saying, you shall not eat of it, cursed is the ground for your sake. By toil you shall eat of it all the days of your life. Thorns and thistles shall it bring forth to you, and you shall eat the herb of the field. In the sweat of your face you shall eat bread till you return from the ground. For out of it you were taken, for dust you are, and dust you will return. And you're right, to the serpent, he says, you'll condemn to crawl on the ground.
It was before all this because it was an order.
Because what? No, it's actually, I'm pretty sure it's after this, but
Was it? Okay.
but that's another one of these sort of explanatory tales. Why do we freak out at snakes, and why do they crawl around? This is the reason. Okay, so here are some questions for us to consider. First, was eating the fruit a sin?
Maybe too early.
Christianity, it is the original sin.
Right, that's what they say.
Right.
I would say too early because Hashem did tell them, when you eat from the tree, you will surely die. So it wasn't a matter if they were going to, it was when they were going to.
No, he says on the day you eat of it, b'yom ha'chalcha. It doesn't say when. It says
So
b'yom.
he already knew that they were going to eat it.
I'm sorry?
So he already knew they were going to eat it.
Well, that's not clear in the text. He just says, don't eat it. On the day you eat of it, you will surely die. But your comment leads me to the second question is, was it a setup?
Yes.
Of course it's a setup.
Well, number one, why
We're
would
getting
God?
some reaction here in the room saying, of course it was a setup. Did God?
But your question was it a sin? Yes, it was a setup. And it was going to come through, and yes, God figured that these people are going to do it eventually, like Preston was pointing out. So he's just waiting for the time when they do it.
Okay, so.
But is it a sin at that time?
Well, Rabbi,
Yes, I'm going to address it. Yes.
on
I don't raise
was it
questions
sin?
unless I answer.
The question, was it a sin?
Uh-huh.
First, what is a sin? And second, one would have to conclude that God lied, because God said you will die, and they did not die.
But was it the establishment of mortality at that moment?
Yeah. So we are going to address all these things. What is a sin? I've got great news for you. On Yom Kippur, we are going to be pounding our chest and giving 22 words for sin. Ashamnu, Bagadnu, Gazalnu, Davarnu, Dofi. A sin usually means disobeying God. But what we're gonna see in a moment is this is in Jewish tradition, it is never referred to as a sin. In Christian tradition, in the Bible, I mean, in the Christian tradition, it is the sin of sins. It's original sin. And then what's the meaning of the consequences? I remember I called them consequences, not punishments. If it was a setup and not a sin, should they be punished? Is it fair that they be punished?
No.
I agree with you, no, and you're going to see that in this analysis. Did the serpent speak truth? We're going to keep following and just, give away everything the serpent says is true. I absolutely agree with you that God did not speak the truth. And why were Adam and Eve expelled from the garden? We're going to get to that. And what's a cherub anyway? I knew that was on the tip of your tongues, and we're going to discuss that. Okay, so question number one, was it a sin? The Hebrew Bible never refers to the disobedience in the garden as a sin. The prophets who rant and rail against sin and who catalog sins against God never refer to this as a sin. In fact, every reference to the Garden of Eden in the Hebrew Bible is a positive reference about how good it was. Original sin as a concept is not part of Judaism. In fact, I mentioned this, I think, on Rosh Hashanah morning. A key prayer in our daily morning liturgy proclaims, Eloheinu shamash natata bita horahi. The soul that you have given me, my God, is pure. And scholars believe this was inserted into our morning liturgy as a subtle or not so subtle statement that we don't accept the idea of original sin. The first time the word sin is used in the Bible is in connection with Cain and Abel. Question, yes.
Okay. Of course, I know my answer, but I'm asking the general answer. So when it says, the snake says, you won't die, but Hashem says, you will die.
Who says? Oh, Hashem, yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
So in essence, could it be something like this? That the purity of a child going along and doing their different things, the innocence of a child, has died off.
Yes.
And that now they're in a different situation. So now that they have knowledge, that innocence is gone. It's
yes. So the question is, if we want to argue that God is not lying, which that's us, what could that phrase mean? It can mean, I think one of the things you suggested, that mortality enters the world. I think what you're suggesting, which I also agree with, is that knowledge of mortality enters the world. Babies don't know they're going to die. My pet cat doesn't know he's going to die, but people know they're going to die. But in fact, the text says, "B'yom ha'chal chamut tamut." So we can interpret it. Remember my point about Jewish study of text. That's what we love to do. Dig into the text, come up with different interpretations. But the simple meaning, the surface meaning of the text is, on the day you eat of it, you will die.
What does it mean, physically or spiritually, or?
Would you please instruct the witness to answer the question? But what part of on the day you eat of it, you will die?
Well, we know it's not just because they don't.
Or God wasn't telling the truth.
Well, I'm going to give Hashem a benefit of the doubt.
I'm sorry?
I'm going to give Hashem a benefit of a doubt.
A benefit? Yes, I'm with you. That's midrash. But the surface meaning of the text, my point is, reading the text closely reveals some things.
You have to define die. What was meant in the die? You will die in this part of the Genesis.
You saying define God?
No, their way of life ended. They did die because they left the Garden of Eden.
They didn't die. They kept living.
But their way of their.
I agree with you. We can interpret and dig into the text to get God off the hook. But the surface reading of the text is, on the day you eat of it, you will die. The text could have said, you will become mortal, death will enter, you will lose your purity. The text could have said a lot of things. That's not what the text says. I just want to point out, in our traditional understanding of the text, we are building in meanings that aren't in the surface meaning of the text. So now let's turn to the question, was it a setup? Did God want them to eat of the fruit of this tree? If not, why place it at the center, make it so enticing, and create the serpent to teach them about it?
So of course it's a setup, because you have to have a story. Well, why the story? You had to have a creation, and you have to explain.
But if
our reality,
right.
Our
But if it's a setup, is punishment appropriate?
No.
Okay, so we're gonna go there. We're gonna go there. I always like to tell it this way. A contemporary parallel, and I know it's going to pop up on your screen in a second. Mom and dad decide to leave the kids home. They're going out to a movie. Kids have gotten to an age where they're trusted. Pizza in the microwave, popcorn, you know, Frozen 14 has just been released by Disney, and so they can watch it. And they, as they're leaving, they say, "Oh, by the way," they're leaving. I don't know what this is. "Oh, by the way, don't look in mom's upper left-hand drawer." So 2 questions. How long before they look? Is there any doubt in your mind that they're going to look?
They're gonna look.
They're going to look. Here's a deeper question. Would you really want to have children who would not look? Reasonable people can disagree on this. My take on this is, if you said something like this to your children, the reason would be you've hidden Frozen 15 in there, or the cookies that they've been dying to have or something, and it's a special treat. But if there really was something dangerous there, you wouldn't tell them about it and you wouldn't leave it unlocked. So the theological question is, and this is where I'm going, as we'll see Rabbi Harold Kushner is going, is can you have free will in theory without demonstrating it? So my bottom line on the story of the Garden of Eden is that it is the story of humans becoming adult, not animal, and having free will. And you can't have it in theory. Your kids can't say to you, "Mommy and Daddy, I love you, and I'm going to do everything you tell me forever and ever, and I'm never going to disobey."
Well, how can they ever grow in something like that?
I'm sorry?
How can you ever grow in something?
Yes, I absolutely agree with you. Okay, so that's why I'm calling it consequences rather than punishment. If it wasn't a sin, there shouldn't be punishments. I absolutely agree with you, Bob. Perhaps this is a story about humanity leaving infancy and or the animal world and becoming human. Perhaps the consequences are really God lovingly explaining to us what it means to be an adult human. This analysis is a Jewish analysis. It follows a book by Rabbi Harold Kushner, who's best known for his book, When Bad Things Happen to Good People. And he's written a wonderful book called How Good Do We Have to Be? A New Understanding of Guilt and Forgiveness, which I highly recommend to you, along with anything any rabbi named Kushner has written. There's 2 rabbis, Kushner, Harold, rational, very famous, Larry Kushner, somewhat of a mystic and a very interesting writer. So Harold Kushner makes this point by looking deeply at the Hebrew. So to the woman, God says, "I will make most severe your pangs, be'etzev," in childbearing. There are several other words in the Bible that specifically refer to pain in childbirth, such as chevel, zair, and chayal. They're used in other parts of the Bible referring specifically to the pain in childbearing. They are not used here. To the man, he says, "By toil you shall eat." But the fascinating thing, and you would never know this unless you look back at the Hebrew, is it's the same Hebrew root. To the woman, it's be'etzav, and here it's be'etzavon. By toil you shall eat. So what's the meaning of etzav? It can mean pain or toil, but it can also mean grieve. And this, to me, is the kicker. In Genesis 6:6, which is just before the flood, we read, "The Lord regretted that he had made man on earth, and his heart was saddened." So that raises huge theological issues. How can God regret anything? Didn't God know what was going to happen? So I would say clearly in the Bible, we don't have that idea, or certainly not in the Torah, of God's omniscience, of knowing everything. And then how could God regret anything? And how could God's heart be saddened? But notice the word for saddened here is the same Hebrew word, but it's in a reflexive verb form, v'yitatsev. So we have the same word for the woman's pain in childbirth, for the man's toil in earning a living, and for God seeing what happened to humanity. Let's take a little closer look. Unlike animals, we will know the pain and worrying about our children and the anguish like God's in seeing our creation turn out in ways other than that of our precise plan. I know that this doesn't refer to anyone in this room, anyone watching, and anyone in the state of Texas. But there are sometimes children who turn out to not be exactly the kind of children that the parents had in mind when they were having babies. I don't know if you've ever heard of this phenomenon. This happens to God in Genesis 6:6, just before the flood. And so here, the interpretation of Rabbi Kushner is God is lovingly explaining that, oh, I can use it. Y'all, like me, are going to have children that may disappoint you. And, you know, my illustration here is, you know, your pet cat doesn't worry about the fate of its kittens, whether it's going to have grand kittens, whether it will meet a kitten from the same tribe, whether, you know, will have a good living. They don't have a sense of worrying about their progeny. I mean, they care. Clearly, you watch animals care for their progeny, but it's different. Yes.
So what's the influence, or what's the occurrence that caused the flood? And what was the influence on the humans that God created? There was an outside source. What was that outside source?
So what I would say is the simple answer is humans had free will, and they did things which were offensive to God. And we don't talk about an outside of God's source. God creates the world. God creates this world where humans have free will.
So the Nephilim didn't have anything to do with it?
There's wild stories in there, which I don't take literally.
Okay.
So I don't take them as outside sources. And the rabbis talk about other sources. And again, that's, you know, that's another great hour and a half discussion. But I don't believe it. I'm sorry?
Wasn't that one of the reasons of the cause of the flood happening?
Because everything that humans did was evil all the time. That's what the text says. So we humans know the pain of worrying about parenting throughout our lives. I have congregants in their 90s worrying about their kids in their 60s and 70s. And this is actually another aside. The biological reason that humans give birth in physical pain is because the large size of the baby's head, due to our large brains, which allow us to know the difference between good and evil and everything else. This was Carl Sagan's observation in a book called Dragons of Eden. Okay, so now let's talk a little more about this idea of God's Itza and ours. Genesis 6:6. Adonai regretted that he had made man on earth, and his heart was saddened. Oh, this is kind of what I just was referring to. How can God regret anything? What does it mean that God's heart was saddened? Perhaps God, like us, is saddened in seeing how his creation turned out. What does that teach us about God's omniscience and our free will? Another very important point, mega point. There's lots of inconsistencies in the Bible. If you want to take a scholarly point of view, you can trace them to different authorships. If you take a rabbinic point of view, their attitude would be, we're not so worried about these things. What we worry about is what we're supposed to do. What we're worried about is how do I treat people? What's kosher? What's not kosher? How do I hang a mezuzah on the door? Does God have omniscience? Does God see and know everything? That's an idea that enters Judaism 1,000 years ago under the influence of Islam, under the influence of Muslim philosophers. And there was a lot of, particularly in Spain, a lot of connection between Muslim philosophers and Jewish philosophers. The Talmud says everything is in the hand of heaven except awe or fear of heaven, and that all is foreseen, yet free will is given, which causes all kinds of interesting intellectual problems. But basically, the Jewish idea is God is in control of everything, but we are a unique species created. And one of the things that's unique about us is that we have free will. And God doesn't control our free will choices. That's why the Torah portion that I'll be reading on Yom Kippur morning talks about God has placed before us a choice to do good or to do evil. God begs us to do good, but clearly doesn't control us. And that's what's presented in Deuteronomy as having the choice. So now I want to address the question, did the serpent speak truth? In Genesis, it says to, the serpent says to the woman, surely you will not die, for God knows that in the day you eat of it, then your eyes will be opened and you will be as gods or like God, Elohim, knowing good and evil. Later on, when they eat of it, it says the eyes of both of them were open. And then later on it says, and Adonai God said, behold, the man has become like one of us. Okay, using this plural phraseology, knowing good and evil. And of course, they do not die on that day, but they, unlike animals and babies, become aware of their mortality and how precious life is. So everything the serpent says is true. Now the question is, why were they expelled from the Garden of Eden? Genesis 3:22. God is reacting to the fact that they've eaten this fruit. And he says, behold, the man has become like one of us, knowing good and evil. And now what if he puts forth his hand and takes also from the tree of life and eats and lives forever? We ate the wrong fruit. 2 trees. And God sent, and Adonai God sent them out from the Garden of Eden to till the ground from where he was taken. So he drove out the man and placed cherubs, cherubim,
Stayed in the Garden of Eden, would never have to
at the
work.
east of the Garden of Eden, and a flaming sword which turned every way to guard the way to the tree of life. So the text is very clear. We can put our own interpretations on it. Not a punishment at all, but a consequence is that now that we've eaten from the tree of knowledge of fruit and evil, we know a little something about biology, and we might ask ourselves, well, this tree over here at Chaim, the tree of life, maybe we should eat of that one. We weren't told not to. We just haven't gotten around to it. God didn't want that to happen. God didn't want us to live forever. Another interesting question. So where Adam and Chava are expelled from the garden, and Kruvim are guarding the way back. It's not a punishment. I mean, it's always thought of as a punishment. It's a consequence. Okay, I want to talk about the cherubs. So he drove out the man and he placed cherubs at the east of the garden and a flaming sword which turned every way to guard the way to the tree of life. The next time we meet the cherubs, the Kruvim, is when God is giving Moses instructions on how to build the Ark of the Covenant. And I'm not going to read all of the details. You know, there's 2 cubits here and a cubit and a half and physical dimensions. But I want to get down to verse 19 right here in the middle. And make one cherub on one end and the other cherub on the other end of the cover. You shall make cherubim on the 2 ends. And the cherubim shall stretch their wings on high, covering the cover with their wings. And their faces will look at one another. Toward the cover of their faces, the cherubim shall be. And you'll put the cover on the ark. And in the ark, you put basically the tablets and the Torah I shall give you. And there God says, I'll meet you between the 2 cherubim. So what were the cherubim, the cherubs, guarding in the Garden of Eden?
That's
Tree of life. And what are they guarding in the Ark of the Covenant?
The books of law.
The what?
Books.
Torah.
There you go.
Yeah.
Therefore, we sing, Eitz Chaim Yi Lemachazikim Ba. We sing, the Torah is the tree of life. This is how it's derived. The tree of life works. The tree of life works. If you partake of the tree of life, you will live forever. The Jewish people partake of the Torah and we live forever. Not exactly the way you might hope it would work, but it does work. So what do cherubim look like? Oh, yeah, don't look at the screen. Anyway, what do cherubs look like? From Genesis, it says they can hold a flaming sword. From Exodus, we know they have wings and faces. So you see down here in the middle, an artist's concept of what the Ark of the Covenant probably looked like. Other more fanciful explanations in Ezekiel So why do we think of them as fat little babies?
Romans.
Sorry?
The Romans.
No, it may be a pun in Aramaic.
Oh.
I know that was going to be your second guess, right? Keruvim is the plural of keruv. Keruv means childlike. Ruv is the Aramaic word for child, and keruv means childlike, and that may be the source of these kind of Renaissance images. Okay, we are just about done. This isn't quite dragging on as long as I feared. Perhaps the most important bottom line for me is that the Hebrew Bible is open to many readings, and more than one can be true. In this particular Jewish reading, noting that other Jewish readings are possible as well, there's no reference to sin. The story is an allegory about our becoming human and becoming adult, and about the importance of human free will.
Would you like?
Think about this question. What if they hadn't eaten from the tree of knowledge? No work, no pain. Children don't need parents, parents don't need children. No tears, no laughter, no longing for something we don't have, and no joy in getting it. No deep knowledge of good, evil, or anything else. Therefore, the woman Chava is the heroine of the story. She is the one that made us human and adult. And we, created in God's image, have serious problems to agonize over and work on, and this is exactly what God intended. I'm going to show just a few more slides that I always like to talk about. It's my understanding of interfaith dialogue and working together with other religious traditions. I don't know if any of you know the story of the blind people examining the elephant. It's a story from Hindu and Jainist tradition. And so here, this one's a little more politically correct. They're blindfolded, they're not actually blind. But the person by the tusk says, I understand the nature of an elephant. It's a spear. The one by the trunk says it's a snake. The one by the leg says it's a tree. The one up against the body says it's a wall. By the tail, it's a rope. And the one by the ear says like a giant fan. So which one of these people are speaking truth? But they're describing the elephant in utterly inconsistent ways. They can't possibly all be speaking truth. Maybe they should have a holy war and fight each other to see what the actual nature of the elephant is. Or here's another idea. Perhaps they should compare notes. Perhaps we can only see and understand a portion of God's totality. Our error is in our certainty that our view is the only truth. So I'm involved in a lot of interfaith dialogue. But at the root of interfaith dialogue has to be a level of humility about understanding God and a seeking of truth, rather than, I have the truth, you don't. If you don't accept my truth, actually, I don't have a problem with people telling me to go to hell. But I do have a problem with people, with a sword in their hand, telling me they're going to accelerate the journey. And this is the thing I add to this story, is that the blind people hear the creature speak. And at this point, I usually blow the shofar because that's what I think an elephant sounds like. And they all hear the same thing. And what I would say that same thing is the golden rule, which in Jewish tradition is, what's hateful to you, don't do any person. In Christian, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. There are about 200 statements of the golden rule in different spiritual traditions. My favorite is a Native American one, which says, don't poke a baby bird in the eye with a twig until you've tried it on yourself. So my definition is any religious or spiritual tradition that holds that God is sacred and that God's primary demand upon us is that we treat people the way we want to be treated. Not God is sacred, that humanity was created in a divine image, that human life is sacred, and that we should treat other people the way we want to be treated. That's my definition of a kosher religion. Kosher meaning fit or appropriate. And then we have different details because we're in different teams trying to get the work done. I'm pretty sure that's the end of this. And now the question is, how do I want to I guess I can stop sharing somehow, but I don't know how.
Yeah, that might
Yeah, here we go.
everyone on
Okay.
here.
Whoa. Okay, so hello everybody. I can now actually see you, and happy to engage in a discussion or questions or anything else, or happy also to let you get on with your day. So questions or comments? The other thing,
So
yeah.
I've read that with Hava and Adam, it was that her punishment was that her child pains would be greater, and with Adam is that he's going to sweat and toil the earth, and from the sweat of his brow and he will gain. But there is a punishment, and not a punishment for all time. It's more of a punishment. So after the Mashiach or Messianic time, that will be over. But for the snake, for what he did, was cursed. And even after the Messianic time or after the Mashiach, he will still crawl on the ground and be struck by us for what he did.
So the authoritative answer to your question is God knows. You know, the thing I wanted to point out is that the same verb, a word, is used to describe childbirth, to describe the agony of physical working, and also to describe God's pain in seeing how creation turns out. So what Rabbi Kushner talks about in the case of the woman is something that, you know, I mentioned that the pain there could be understood to mean the pain that you see when your children don't turn out to be exactly like what you had in mind. Rabbi Kushner describes the pain of the man in working as the sacrifices that you have to make. You know, do I go to work today or do I go to my kid's soccer game? Do I really build this product or building up to the top standards, or do I cut corners a little bit? And we're always struggling with that. And then, you know, all the prophecies from the Messiah you're going to find in Talmud and Midrash and Zohar, and there's lots of different discussions, and you know, they are worthy of study, but I don't think there is broad agreement on those. The rabbis always are concerned with agreeing on the details of human living. I mentioned this on Rosh Hashanah, and so I'll give this example. Suppose we were all Orthodox Jews sitting at this table here, and we're having a discussion about the afterlife. And you believe in 7 levels of heaven, you believe in 12 levels of heaven, you believe in resurrection, you believe in reincarnation, you are not quite sure about anything, and we can't come to an agreement. And we talk for 2 hours about this question, and we can't come to an agreement. Is that a problem?
No.
No. Now we're going to eat lunch. And there's chicken on the table. And we can't agree about what makes a chicken kosher. Is that a problem?
Yes.
Yes, we can't eat. So that kind of summarizes the rabbinic attitude toward questions of belief and questions of action. Questions of belief are open-ended. Developing an organized logical theology doesn't enter Judaism until about 1,000 years ago under the influence of Islam. The Muslims were theologians, and they were also grammarians. They developed a grammar of Arabic, which is the same as the grammar of Hebrew, because the languages are very similar. The Muslims were theologians and philosophers, heavily influenced by Greek thought and by Aristotle, and Maimonides, who's the preeminent Jewish philosopher. I think he feels bad that we don't have a theology. So he writes a book called The Guide to the Perplexed, in which he lays out a theology. So, for example, does God have a physical form? In the Hebrew Bible, all the time. God leads us out of Egypt with an outstretched arm. God enters the Garden of Eden, and they hear him walking around. When the idiom that God gets angry is God's nose gets red. So in the Bible, there are dozens and dozens of references to God's physical form. Maimonides says this is a reference, these are allegorical. This is because the Torah speaks the way people speak. But who says he's right? Okay, that's Maimonides' opinion. I'm going to talk about Kabbalah on Rosh Hashanah. I can't remember, I'm sorry, on Yom Kippur. I can't remember the evening or the day. I call it kind of demystifying mysticism. And you will hear the Kabbalists go overboard against Maimonides. The Kabbalists will say, God, of course, has physical forms. Now I'm going to give you 50 or 60 different descriptions of God's physical form, including one which lays out the dimensions of God's arm size, God's head size, God's ankle size. In fact, I have calculated, this is the first time ever done, certainly in the state of Texas. I have calculated, you know, we have 10-gallon hats. I have calculated the number of gallons in God's hat according to the mystical text Shiur Koma, which describes the physical size of God's head. I'm sorry, I'm going off.
A little sidebar on that. The
Yeah.
10-gallon hat was Jews in the hat business that came up with that.
You see that? That proves it. Okay. Preston, I don't know if that was helpful, but you're describing one mystical tradition and understanding of this text. So again, I apologize for going off the deep end, but that's what I do.
Well, I like the deep end. It's always good.
Sorry?
I like the deep end.
Yeah.
Okay, good. I often say that there's a story of two boys bragging about their rabbi. And one boy says, my rabbi can speak on any subject for an hour. And the other boy says, that's nothing. My rabbi can speak for 2 hours on no subject at all. That's me. I think somebody else had a question.
Yes, I have
Go
a
ahead.
question or a comment. I think it's difficult to distinguish between a consequence and a punishment. You know, if I were, like, if you take it to the level of a child, my grandchild has watched too much television in one day, well, the consequence of that is tomorrow you don't get to watch television. Or you can think of that as a punishment. So is the point not to distinguish between the two, but to realize that this action is not a sin?
My main point is, I agree with Rabbi Kushner that this was a setup and that God wanted to take humanity out of animal world and out of infancy. And the way to do it was to graphically display free will. And so the consequence of being willing to be adult and human is that we're going to have these problems. If somehow we could stay animal-like and childlike, we wouldn't have those problems. So my point is to give a counter reading of the text that it wasn't a sin and it wasn't a punishment. It was an allegory about becoming human. And I'll talk about this on Yom Kippur also. I take these stories very seriously, but I don't take them literally. I take them in the example I love to use is the story of the boy who cried wolf. So how many of you know that story? Most people do, but not every culture. So the question is, did it really happen as described in the story? And an even more important question is, does it matter whether it happened? The point of the story is to teach us lessons. So I would say that's the point of Torah. I'm a physicist. I have lots of old physics books. After 5 or 10 years, they're all obsolete. The Torah we've been studying for 2,500 years at least, and it's still as alive as it ever was. That is the truth of Torah. There's a whole other question, subject I'm also very interested in, is the historicity of Bible. What in the Bible can we actually attach to histories, to things that have happened as attested in other sources like archaeology or sacred texts or even not sacred texts of other cultures? And there the answer is around the time of King David. around the time of King David, we start having archaeological examples of testifying to David and Solomon, and certainly the kings that are after. Again, another long-winded answer. Any other questions or comments? Or
I've got a puzzle.
yes,
Since we have 2 minutes, or in Jewish time 4.
or 2 hours. Remember me.
Well, yeah. But before I do that, I want to make a statement about.
And I don't know if they can hear you. If you really want to be heard by the other group, you'll have to talk over my shoulder.
Well, most of them have already heard this before.
Okay.
Just speak louder, Bob.
It's Larry.
Thanks for the comment.
Oh, Larry, I'm sorry. There you
When Rabbi showed the chart of these different faiths with the golden rule, I like to say that it goes back to Leviticus 19, verse 18 and 34, that taking from Rabbi Akiva, that's the essence of everything, and the rest is commentary. If these different religions get together and they take their notes and they start discussing, then we will see just how much closer we are than we are separate. But to get those to consider to take that move is something that we're beginning to start. But when someone has an opinion, I say, that's great. That's your opinion. Everybody has an opinion, just like you said, everybody has an opinion. And to me, they're all right, and they're all right for each other. But I do not believe that one opinion supersedes another's opinion. They're still equal.
Yes. So yes, I absolutely agree with you. And but what how's that working out here in Texas?
It's Texas. Does anything?
Well, let me tell you, it's the same thing in Southern California. So the reason is, at the heart of Christianity, which I've studied a lot, and because I wrote this book, A Christian's Guide to Judaism, I speak to more Christians than Jews. At the heart of Christianity is the following, and I have another class, which I'd be happy to give right now, called What I Love About Biblical Hebrew. At the heart of Christianity is Jesus had to die for all the world's sins, okay? If you're Christians, you have to accept that. If you don't accept it, you're not Christian. By the way, nothing like that exists in Judaism. In Judaism, you're Jewish if you're born to a Jew. Doesn't matter what you believe. Or you convert, which does matter what you believe. So Jesus died for all the world's sins. The problem that it's responding to is we can't obey all the rules of the Torah. 613 just in the first 5 books of the Bible, and the rabbis, they had thousands more. So the interesting question for me, or this arises once again out of translation. 200 years before the time of Jesus, there was a translation of the Hebrew Bible into Greek, and it's called the Septuagint. And when they come to the Hebrew word Torah, which means instruction in a very broad sense. In fact, it comes from the root word which means to aim an arrow. And a teacher is called a moreh, or a female teacher, morah. Same root word, meaning a very broad range of things. In the Jewish concept of this, here's the instructions. There's also rules of football and basketball, and people break them, but these are the rules. With the understanding, we're not going to get it perfect. When the Jews translating the Hebrew Bible into Greek get to the word Torah, they have to pick a Greek word, right? Because they're translating. They pick the Greek word nomos. The Greek word nomos means law in a very narrow code of law sense. So the Jews reading their Bible in Greek, why are they reading Greek? The same reason we read in English. That's what the language they were speaking. The Jews reading the Bible in Greek got the sense of the laws of the Torah being much more demanding and narrow. And what the author of Christianity, who is Paul, says is it's impossible to fulfill all of these. Therefore, we are sunk. And I have quotes from the New Testament about the law is sent as a trap and punishment and so on. So the Christian response to this is faith in Jesus as Lord and Savior and dying for our sins takes the place of obeying all but roughly 10 of the commandments. Why do Christians eat ham on Easter? Okay, ham is prohibited in Leviticus and Deuteronomy. It's in the Christian Bible. And there's lots of laws in the Christian Bible that, because it's our Bible, the sacred scriptures of Christians adopt the Hebrew Bible lock, stock, and barrel. Why don't they obey all those laws? Because faith in Jesus takes the place of those laws. So here is the problem and why you and I are not having so much success in the question you raised, Larry. If a guy like me and a guy like you and the people around this table could get the benefits of the afterlife, whatever they are, another wonderful hour and a half course, actually 4.5 hours. If we could do that by virtue of how we live our lives, why did Jesus have to die? Jesus dies for everyone, therefore our way is impossible. Therefore, there's a serious theological barrier to people really accepting what you're saying. And I recognize that. Let's recognize what's there. Can Christians interpret their Bible the same way I interpret my Bible? Namely, as a teaching tool, as reflecting the times in which it was written, as reflecting just the problems of translation. If you can dig into it and say, okay, I understand there really aren't issues in the Greek text of the New Testament, and I understand the historical basis for those, and now I'm okay with relaxing my attitudes a bit, then we can sit around the table and talk. But that's not so easy.
Most Christians accept the Old Testament as being Jewish history, and that's it. It's just Jewish history.
Yeah, so that when I wrote my book, I wrote a lot about what Christians believe and what Jews believe. And everything I wrote about, my publisher is the Paulist Press, which is a scholarly press. Everything I wrote about what Christians believe is true for some Christian sects and not others.
Right.
There are 43,000 Christian movements.
That's right.
And there have to be, because Christianity is based on proper belief. So if you're all here in Amarillo, in the 14th Church of Jesus Christ Savior, and you accept everything in their statement of faith except for these two things at the end, you're out. You got to form the 15th church because it's a matter of belief. And so what you're saying is absolutely true. When I work with Catholics, Catholic thinking is much closer to Jewish thinking.
Yeah.
Catholic thinking sees the texts as something that you can really dig into and interpret, and they leave it to the church fathers and the scholars to dig into. The protest against Catholics, which gave rise to Protestantism, said, no, just give me the text and I'll interpret it, or my little church will interpret it. So I understand the problem. I'm pretty sure I can't solve that problem. Preston, you and I might say when the Messiah comes, we'll all come to know the one God, and we'll ask him, is this the first time you came or the second time you came? And there's one story that says the Messiah responds by saying, I've come dozens of times, but you guys were so busy fighting with each other that you never noticed.
And that's a true statement right there.
Uh-huh. So, again, other questions, thoughts, alternative sermons?
Stan Edwin had a question earlier, had his hand up.
Okay, Stan?
He's got his mic off.
You're muted if you want to ask a question.
No, I didn't. I was just sitting up straight. I was not asking a question. Thank you, though.
Okay. One of the things I may want to show, let me see if I can.
We shouldn't talk about your classes coming up.
Yeah, I want to talk about that. So now how do I get back? Is that it? Yes. Okay, so now I want to share screen again. I think it's right here. Yes.
Sure.
Okay. So this is going to take, so this is my website. So if you go to my website and just type in lotger.com, it'll take a little time. Actually, the website is slow in loading and slow in sharing. I shouldn't have even done that. Yeah, it's still loading. Well, let me see if I can. If you go to the website, you'll see on the top a bunch of things, and I would say click on the one that says classes, and hopefully this won't be too confusing. And if you scroll down, you will see, I don't know what's going on, lots of classes. So one that I'm starting toward the end, oh no, hang on, I gotta plug my computer in. I'm running low. Does anybody know where there's an outlet?
Yep, Bob's got an outlet. Yeah, there's one.
Hang on.
Yeah, there should be one up there.
Hold on. I gotta get this.
So go away, kids.
I'm so glad I wrote this. Yep. Okay, I gotta move you out of the way. This connects to this side of the computer. Okay. Why don't we just change chairs? Okay, so I am starting a class in 2 weeks, I guess. It's called The Taste of Judaism and Jewish Literacy. It's 3 sessions followed by 15 sessions. Wednesdays, 7 to 8:30 Pacific. So it's 9 to 10:30 out here. And well, it's not beginning 2001, but 21, I'll have to fix that. And then this is a class that people take if they're interested in conversion. And I'm going to have a separate set of sessions on Thursday evenings. We'll see how many people register for them, for people who are just interested in conversion, because there's a whole other set of questions that arise. So that's one thing. Now I just want to show you all the classes I have on my website. So I did something actually for a congregation in Idaho, which is a learner's minion. It's what I did last Friday night, where I basically explain all of the prayers. Then I have 4 sessions called Children of Abraham, comparing and contrasting Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. And so there are 4 different sessions on that. And in all of these, you can click and get copies of my slides, suggested reading, and these are all YouTube videos, and I actually hope to be able to post this as a YouTube video as well. Then a class, Introduction to Kabbalah, 3 sessions. What Happens After I Die, 3 sessions. Science and Religion, 3 sessions. Deep Jewish Insights from the Music of Fiddler on the Roof, which is fun, except I couldn't actually include the videos because YouTube wouldn't let me publish them. This one's really fun. The delightful and surprising mythology of Judaism. This is kind of Kabbalah going to the moon. And there are 5 different sessions. The first one is on mythology about women, Lilith and Shekhinah. Shekhinah is the bride of God. That might entice you to tune in. And then heaven and hell, Adam and Eve in the garden, some of what we covered, and the Messiah. And then actually, I taught this class last year, so the videos of all the sessions are already there in smaller form. Sephardic Jewry, the joys of Hebrew ethics, when bad things happen. And then one of my favorite ones is illicit sexual encounters in the Bible and the genealogy of the Messiah. So if you want to register for the Introduction to Judaism class, just send me an email. My email is lotger@aol.com. I think I've sent a description to the entire mailing list of this group, but it's lotker@aol.com. And there's no charge for the classes. I'm the community rabbi for the local Jewish Federation, and I just do this under that guise and because I just love doing this. So yeah, thank you for reminding me to mention that. And I hope to see many of you on Yom Kippur, either in person or you virtually. And I don't know why I'm getting a little message here, but I hope you can still hear me and understand. So any other questions? I'm not going anywhere, but I know we're definitely running over time.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thanks, Rabbi.
Thank you, Rabbi. It's been a joy having you here.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. You
Thank
are
you,
not
Rabbi,
having
very
fun
much.
that I guarantee. And I love, the virtual world that we live in, so people can gather. When I have many of my classes, I have 120, 130 people registering, and about half or so tune in live, but the other half are just watching the videos, and it's great. Lucky guy to be able to do this.
Thank you.
You are welcome.
Okay. Candy, do we have any announcements?
Yom Kippur service, Kol Nidre, 8 p.m. Wednesday night.
Okay.
And the only other thing is, as I just said, but I didn't know if everyone can hear, that I just wanted to thank Rabbi Mike for making this trek and also taking the extra time that you're taking with us beyond just the services that was your commitment. And your visit here has just been a joy to us, really. That's the best way to describe it. Really enjoying your visit.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for allowing me to indulge what I love doing most.
Okay.
Okay, so I will let you handle whatever it is we need to do to get this done.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye, guys.
Bye.